So we're going to start with just a intro to what the SDGs are, kind of where they came from, and then talk about a thing called the UN Global Compact, which is related to the SDGs. We'll talk about the progress report that the UN actually publishes, where they track progress on achieving the goals. And then we're going to talk about what each of our companies are doing with the SDGs, how they're using them. And then also I'll talk a little bit about how it's possible to translate them to like a building scale with Living Building Challenge in particular. So that's the big picture. And so the SDGs came from a meeting of the United Nations. This is like a UN level agreement essentially. And they published this in 2015. So at the time it was, let's set really ambitious goals for a target by 2030 to really drive what it means to have sustainable development around the globe. And one of the important notes, which is what sets up the Global Compact in particular, is that the SDGs were written by government agencies for other government agencies. So they were intended to be government level goals and metrics and targets. So a lot of them are set up around number of policies that are addressing X, Y, and Z, or nation level, like national level poverty rate, for example, right? So they're intended to be kind of geopolitical goals and objectives. And so those are broken out. I think everybody probably has seen all of these icons and the way that they relate, but I think the important aspect to them, which I don't really have a slide for, but the real kind of primarily because it's not an interesting slide, you drill down into each one of these things and there are 5 to 11 different indicators that are being tracked for every single one of these goals. And so very often these icons get splashed around on corporate sustainability reports or on websites or wherever, and people talk about general alignment with the goals. But really, one of the ways to really use them effectively is to drill down into those indicators, because that's where you get into kind of the actionable things that individuals can do, that businesses can do, that a specific project could do, because you can start to see what is the measurable thing that we're talking about, what is the metric that we're actually trying to move the needle on, and then that gives you opportunities to then develop action plans around that. And I'll get into that in much more detail in later sections, but again, just kind of reinforcing this, like the way the goals are written, like a lot of this is around like 16 and 17, right, are really focused on like governmental partnership, right? Like, let's all figure out how we fund decarbonization in the global south, right? Like big picture partnerships. And so there's this gap, or there was this gap between the way the goals were structured and the way they were written and the way that they were intended, when suddenly all the private sector started saying like, this is actually really good. What can I do? Like, what's my role? How do I fit in with this? And a lot of that came on the kind of the corporate side first. From a corporate sustainability perspective, there's a really strong interest in demonstrating that you're supporting them and contributing to them. And that's where this first beautiful seamless handoff occurs.
Thanks, Sean. From the UN Sustainability Development Goals, the UN then decided too that they wanted something where a corporation actually could make a true commitment to the goals. So they created what they call the Global Compact. That was created back in 2010, and Target actually was one of the first manufacturers to actually sign and become a signatory. And what the Global Compact was really made to do is saying, we are going to commit to the goals. We are going to every year commit to the reporting that you are asking to support these goals. And if you go to the next slide, Sean. And the principles behind it was, when I look at it, there's a few different sections to look at. So their focus for the Global Compact was for countries and corporations to think about human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. And then under that, they were trying to break it down. And as Sean said, this was originally a very big picture. Like they were looking at, the city of Boston making these kind of decrees and changing policy. But then when they were looking at how does a corporation look at it, they broke it down more into local action and people action. So if you're a corporation signing, not a country or a city, what are you doing both for people in the local communities as well as how you're impacting those areas? So when they look at local action, really talking about, a corporation's impact on the environment, what are you doing to create and change how we look at the environment through technologies, the development of that? Are you looking at, for instance, as Target as a manufacturer, we have like 35 factories around the world. So each of those factories have the ability to pollute the air, pollute the water, pollute the land that's around there and cause damage to the people manufacturing. So when they're looking at local action, they're saying to a corporation like Target, what are you doing in that community? What are you doing to the water in the community, the soil in that community, the air and the people in the community? And then on the people side it's making sure that we are not using forced labor, we're not discriminating, that we're maintaining international human rights, but also whoever we work with is as well. So I think I really think the UN Compact is a great way to say, you know what, these are the standards we want to live by. And we don't have a lot of that in business. There's not like an overarching goal for corporations to set kind of a higher standard for themselves. And I think this gives people the ability to do that. Next slide, Sean. And through that, they've really broken it down into, they call it the 5 Ps. It's, the importance of the human and planet, people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. And so when you look at what the UN goals are trying to do, what the UN Global Compact to do is really to change how we think, shift, what is your focus? Every day you make these decisions, how do you make the decisions so that they're really positive for these 5 areas as well? So that's really how the UN Global Compact, at least in my mind as Target, how we should be looking at them. And then personally, I'm working for a company that signed the UN Global Compact. So then how do I look at people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership as well? And the partnership, I think each of these goals are really interesting. And as Sean said, if you have a chance, dig into each one of them. They have really great detail on them that break down to smaller chunks. So if I look at people from a high level, you can say, well, how could I impact poverty or hunger? But if you look at on a lower level, which is I really think what the Global Compact wants us to do is that local action is, can you drop off a bag of groceries at the local food bank? So it is a big ideal to achieve, but if we break it down in smaller actions and we think about local action and local people, what does that really mean for the UN Global Compact? I think that was the last of this part of slides. So next up, Sean's going to take us to the 2022 report.
I've got one. I do have one other. I had one other slide on the Global Compact piece. This is one of those seamless points of coordination.
It's supposed to be a conversational flow, Sean and I decided. So
yeah, exactly. So the UN Global Compact is, it is a initiative of the UN. So it's actually like the UN Secretary General and the UN has agreed, like, this is a function that we're going to fund. The compact is then broken up into different networks around the globe, and so there is a US UN Global Compact network, and director for that corporate engagement is a guy named Adam Gordon, who's in New York. So he's a point of contact that everybody could be connected to. But you can see kind of the number of participants in the US, and this is relatively, like the US participation is relatively small compared to the rest of the world, especially in Europe, given, like US attitudes toward anything that's related to the UN. So, and the other thing that I wanted to share was just when I went at ILFI signed on to the Global Compact, and I helped kind of facilitate that process. And essentially it requires these kind of 4 steps. You need like a letter of commitment from the highest senior ranking person, right? CEO or like the board president for a nonprofit or the executive director for the nonprofit, et cetera. And the commitment is really, they have, because Roxanne said the Global Compact actually predates the Sustainable Development Goals in their current form. So that was 2010. The SDGs came out in 2015. Prior to 2015, the SDGs were something else. They had called them, I think, goals for, it was a similar name. It was like goals for a sustainable world or something, but they weren't in the same format. So that was, the 2015 is when it became the really ambitious targets of like no hunger, no poverty.
And much easier to understand. I think before they were a little bit confusing as to what are we to achieve?
Yeah, I think they hired a graphic designer to help them think through, like, how do you actually communicate all of your ideas to people? And they were like, you need icons. So the Global Compact predated the SDGs the way that they exist today. And so the Global Compact has these 10 principles that Roxanne was talking about in terms of corruption and anti-bribery and human rights. And so you have to commit to those as kind of the bare minimum. And then the next step is to figure out how does your organization relate to the SDGs, right? So like what are the SDGs that your company could then based on the value chain of that organization, the activities of that organization, and the supply chain of that organization, what are the SDGs that you most readily have an opportunity to move the needle on? And then to, as Roxanne said, report annually on the progress. So,
and just I think it's important too to recognize, as you said, Sean, the CEO commitment. So our CEO signed the commitment letter, but our board of directors then voted on it and said, this is now our policy, and signed off on. And they re-vote every year that we will continue on this path and continue to vote. So if a CEO is making that kind of commitment there and taking it seriously, like it becomes part of the DNA of the organization, which is what should happen. It doesn't always, but that is what should happen. It's a big step, and it's a lot of reporting to do.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts before we shift gears to the next?
So just as a quick reiteration, not quite sure where you landed on this. The Global Compact commitments are more or less, but not exactly aligned with the SDGs because of that transition?
Yeah, I mean, actually the Global Compact, the alignment essentially is, the Global Compact has 10 principles that are these 10 principles. So the company commits to upholding these 10 principles in all of its activities. And then the company commits to looking at the SDGs and figuring out which SDGs align with their business activities and trying to take action towards making the world better on those SDGs. And then reporting on that progress.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that simplification for me.
And then the other thing that's cool about the Global Compact, so the Global Compact has partnered with GRI, which is like the Global Reporting Initiative. So that's that's in the ESG, corporate ESG reporting world. That is like, that's the standard reporting format for pretty much everything. And that they've partnered together to come up with tools and resources and case studies and examples. And so there's a lot of resources that exist on the Global Compact site and as part of the network to try to help organizations get better at figuring out how this works at the organization level. So that's another kind of resource and opportunity, is to look at like what's on the Global Compact site. There's some stuff on the GRI site about how companies can engage with the SDGs. So they've got a procedure outlined in terms of like, well, how do you define which SDGs align with your business, right? And so there's a kind of a protocol for how you do that and recommended steps to take. So. Okay. Good. Okay, so every year the UN puts out a Sustainable Development Goal report, and they report on the progress that they are tracking relative to all of those little individual indicators. So they've got like a massive database where they're tracking all of these different indicators. They get reporting back from every country, right? And then they see how close are we to actually meeting the target indicator. And the report is really long. It's like, I don't know, 300 pages or something. But they do have, again, nice summary pages for each of the top level goals, and then a whole chapter on each of the goals that go into each indicator. So I picked out a couple that I thought stood out to me, just because I think it helps tell the story that we need to do some real action here. So like when we talk about the poverty, right, 4 years of progress against poverty has been erased by COVID-19. When we talk about affordable, reliable, sustainable energy, impressive progress in electrification has slowed due to the challenge of reaching the hardest to reach. Financing towards developing countries for renewables has declined for a second year in a row. Progress in energy efficiency needs to step up. So there's a significant, in a lot of the years, the progress reports have looked really good, where they're like, look, we've reduced poverty by 5%, or we've, like they have shown progress on some of them, but this year's is particularly dire. And the climate change is humanity's code red warning, right? Like rising global temperatures continue unabated, leading to more extreme weather, et cetera, right? Like we're to the point where, and I think a lot of, I'm seeing this with a lot of the organizations that we're working with too, that everybody sees that this is becoming, like 2030 is like yet tomorrow, right? If you are building a building today and you're not thinking about what it's going to be doing in 2030, then like we essentially just need to be building as if it is 2030 today, right? Because otherwise we are too late, right? And so, a lot of the decarbonization plans, like the charts have these like, here's your business as usual, here's what you need to do, right? It's like, in the next 7 years, you need to reduce your carbon emissions by 50%. And then you have another 25 years to deal with the other 50% to get to 2050 or 2040. But it's like the drop off between now and 2030, which is essentially the deadline for a 1.5 degree world. Like if we don't reach that threshold, then we're baking ourselves into a 2 degree plus world. So anyway, I think this was, Roxanne and I were talking about this, like, it is in the context of the SDGs, this is the best call to action that exists, is looking at this progress report and seeing that, like, for all of the really good, like, corporate reporting and alignment and commitment that's happening, we're still, as a global community, falling short. Roxanne, did you want to add anything?
Well, I think it was, when Sean and I were going through these, it was really, interesting, if not scary to look at, only because it's just showing, like we can't keep thinking it's someone else's problem. Like, and I keep going back to small actions, and small actions do make big changes, because if we're all doing something small to make the change, then it will slowly happen. And the more we all have a voice and talking about it, more change will happen. But um, it was amazing to look back, I think, for both of us to see how much COVID set us back. We know it had an impact. We know it had an impact on people, on kids, everything. But you look at these reports and it really does show that. And we know, at least, I'm in Boston and the Boston Globe, and all through COVID, they talked about like poverty level, but also kids who normally got at least 2 meals a day at school no longer got those 2 meals a day at school. I mean, those are the day-to-day local action impacts that COVID caused, and we're still not caught up to that. So, I think it's good to go through the report, even though it's not real positive, but it is good to go through and then really think, well, locally, what can I do? What small thing can I do? Don't become overwhelmed with this, but just think of, like, is there something I can do once a month to make a difference in that? But I think we were both a little bit taken aback when we looked at the report, because it just shows you how far something like a pandemic COVID hit us and how far it pushed us back.
Yeah, the number of these one pagers that had a COVID-19 reference. I mean, and across the goals, like I didn't do the math, but it was like, oh, COVID-19, oh, COVID-19, oh, COVID-19, like the education one, right? Because all the schools closed and kids went to online learning, and like education metrics all dropped, and like kind of like across the board, there were impacts that, yeah, I was surprised to see COVID-19 show up as much. I don't know why I was surprised. It seems kind of
Yeah.
obvious, but
Yeah.
okay. So then, so what are we doing? What are organizations doing? What's Target doing? What's JLL doing? What are other companies doing? What can everybody here do? That's the next section.
So I'm going to start with Target. And at Target, our CEO was always saying, what's our human and environmental impact strategy? That's kind of his go-to. And part of that is because we were a public company for about 3 years. We were 51% owned by public entities and 49% owned by family. The family had owned Target for about 90 years. And they decided 2 years ago, right before the pandemic, that they wanted to buy back the stock and become family owned again, because when you have stock holders, they want a return on the investment much faster than some environmental policy can happen. And for the family, they decided this was the legacy they wanted to leave behind, is the impact they made, both to human and environment. So they bought all the stock back so that when they made decisions, they were not beholden to anyone else. And they decided to pick 3 targets, which was health and well-being, climate and circular economy, and social responsibility, which does align within what we as an organization do, how we make our decisions. Next slide, Sean. So as I said, I've been with Target for about 17 years, and I've moved through and always have focused on sustainability. That's really been my area, and that's why I've stayed with Target, is because I do believe they're trying to look at what can we do. So for Target, in signing the Global Compact, we then decided to figure out what are the UN SDGs, and sorry, this is kind of small, that we were going to focus on. So we picked these 10 that we were going to focus on. But as an organization, we look to involve our employees, as well as externally all of our partners, all of our customers that we work with, the NGOs we work with, in trying to meet our goals. So as last year for the month of May, we took each of these, we did all of those 17 goals, and each day we talked about one of them and what we as a corporation could do to impact it, and then what you personally could do to impact it. And one of them was, we had a challenge, how many books can you read to your kids in a month? Just talking about education, can you drop off a box of pasta every week to a food bank? We were trying to show the employees that as an individual person, you can make an impact on these goals. And then as a corporation, we really looked at how do we focus on these. And I always thought, at first I thought, well, number 17, which is partnerships, we're a corporation. What does that really mean? Well, what it means is that working with partnerships, we work with the Cradle to Cradle organization, we work with LEAD, we work with Living Future, we work with all of these various organizations, including organizations like the Vinyl Institute, coming together with various partnerships to talk about and take actions that do help with the sustainability development goals. So I think, and all of you are doing partnerships every day talking about sustainability. So that does move the needle. For TARCAT, the climate action has been a big one we focused on the last 2 years. So for that goal, which is number 13, just as Sean had talked about getting to 1.5, we had set 2030 goals for reducing our greenhouse emissions. Then we realized, is this 30% reduction real? Does that mean as we increase production, is that taking into account what we have to reduce? Because we're saying today, this is what we need to do reduce, but we also then started looking at, okay, we have to project what our sales are going to be up until 2030 so that we are covering that increase in production as well. So we went to science-based targets who went through the evaluation for us and said, okay, this is what your projected sales are. This is what your projected, and really went through with us to say, okay, 30% will get you there. And so what we decided to do is do a 2027, 30%, and then a 2030, 35%. And science-based targets said, okay, that we feel really good that this will get you where you need to be so that your impact is helping to go down to the 1.5%. But it was, for all of us at TARCAT, it was a lot to look at because we weren't thinking about our increased production. We were thinking, well, this is where we are today. If we reduce, then we hit that goal. Well, no, we can't take that into account. We had to take into account, do we project hiring more salespeople who are going to be driving? Are we projecting higher production? So looking at all of that and taking all that into account really helped us then to look to be able to adjust and meet that guideline. So for TARCAT, the goals really are helping us set our standards and helping us set us goals. And that as a company, what we're doing. And then internally, we did different actions with our employees to help them understand why the science-based targets, why we were doing it, and why is this important, and why are we reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And so for a week, we announced we had the new science-based targets. And then that whole week, we did internal communication. Have you thought about hanging your clothes on the line? Have you thought about washing with cold water? Have you thought about riding your bike to work? Have you thought about, and helping them think about how they reduce their personal carbon footprint. And we had a calculator for each person to calculate their own carbon footprint. It was really interesting. We have factories in Ohio, Dalton, Georgia, Alabama, and most of the people live very close to the factories. And a few of them said, I live less than a mile and I've never thought about riding my bike. I drive every single day. They now walk or ride their bike to work. So it's that mindset and that small change of getting people to think about it. And we have to have the buy-in from our employees. If our employees don't believe what we're doing is the right thing, then they're not going to believe, as a company, this is a great company to work for. So we kind of look at it as twofold. We want to do the things that are right to make a change, but then we have to have our employees understand why we're doing it and believe in doing it as well. And we do see, this year, HR said they have had, in the last 9 months, the highest rate of new employees ask about our sustainability policies before they would sign on and be hired. So I think people do care now. And we're talking somebody coming to work in our operations facility, someone who's working in shipping is actually asking the question. And, you know, I think that's a great sign that things are changing. I have a poster in my office of the UN sustainability goals. We have one in each of our manufacturing facilities, our offices. And the UN, at the very last slide, we do have resources for you, but the UN has unbelievable resources available. And they have a kids book, which I had ordered because I had some friends with young kids. And I'm like, well, I'll give them the books. Well, I kept them instead, and we use them for employees because it very simply tells the story. It's very graphic. As Sean said, they definitely hired a graphic designer at some point to change all this. And so we use the information of kids' books with our employees because it does make a difference. So we, some of the other things that we look at is good health and well-being. And you think, well, good health and well-being, so that means what you eat. But for Target, we look at it as it means our products. So we have, for the last 5 years, worked on lowering the VOC for our products. So this year we hit 99% of our products are ultra low VOC. We do the carbon reduction report, the CDP report, and we do cradle to cradle principles too. So to us, continuously optimizing our raw materials is what good health and well-being means for our products. Because then that means the people producing them are having better health, the environment that we're doing has better health. So and the people using our product. But then the other part is we take it back to our employees, and we have brought in free flu vaccine workshops so that they can get a flu vaccine right at work. So for us, it's really how do we connect those two? And then the last part of it is we work with a lot of vendors. We purchase raw materials from vendors, and part of our agreement now, because we have to report on it to the UN, is our supply chain and what is the labor force, what do they use? They have to sign off that they don't use forced labor, that they have fair labor practices. Through the UN, we have to sign off on certain parts of China that we do not and will not import or work with, certain areas that they find have bad labor practices. So it really sets the stage for an organization, I feel, at least for Target. To me, it's really important that we use these guidelines. Someone a lot smarter than me and most of us at Target worked through this, thought about this very hard, and developed this plan that really works. So for us, it's like, let's utilize their matrices, let's utilize their processes to really get ahead and then work on this. So I think that was the only slide I had, Sean.
Great.
I think we're seamless here.
Yeah, exactly. One thing, Roxanne, that like you and I had talked about, I feel like I've seen a lot of organizations, I would call it like post-rationalize their alignment with the SDGs in terms of their corporate reporting. So they kind of look at like, here's what we're doing, and then they put the SDG goal on the same page of that topic on their corporate sustainability reporting, and it feels a little bit superficial. And there are other organizations that it feels more generative, where organizations are looking at the goals and using the goals to help drive their strategy and help to guide the strategy. And you had talked about, one of the questions I asked you was like, do you feel like your commitment to these 10 SDGs, is that a static commitment, or do you revisit that? Like, are you going back to them and saying like, oh, well, maybe we could have an impact on fill in the blank SDG? So I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we do go back and look at it. And one in particular, the clean water, we as a manufacturer, as we manufacture product, the resilient is heated up and then we cool it down through water. And then the last 4 years that we really started looking at clean water and water as a raw material scarcity almost. So we created closed loop water systems for every facility, which has allowed us to have a 68% reduction in our water use. So we do kind of go back and think, is there something else that we can be doing? And we do a lot of volunteer things. And when we looked at clean water and just kind of going through information, somebody on my team found that there are actually places in the US that don't have good, clean running water, or even running water that goes to their house. And so we did start working with an organization to fund a few of those projects as well. So we always try to look at it as internal and external, what can, and again, because I really take to heart where they say local action, and I think that's important. The other area we looked at really was poverty, and our corporate office is in Cleveland, Ohio. We have, as I mentioned, Florence, Alabama, Dalton, Georgia. We're not exactly in high metropolis areas. And in Cleveland in particular, the poverty level is pretty high. And the number of poverty was not one of our main goals. But as COVID hit and we were seeing what was happening in Cleveland, we set up a busing system, because we're about probably 45 minutes from downtown Cleveland. And we're out in the country. Downtown Cleveland has a high poverty rate. And we started doing a morning pickup and an afternoon drop off for anyone who wanted to work at our factory, to be able to, because the big thing was they couldn't get to the factory, or, they would be late because they could try and take 2 or 3 buses. So even though poverty isn't one of our main goals, we kind of relook at every year, what else should we be doing? And we're just constantly trying to figure this out a little bit better. But I think it can't be static, as you said, Sean. Like, things change. Things that, the pandemic showed us that hit on the 2022 report means we really do have to revisit all of the SDGs. Is there something else we can do with one of these that we hadn't thought about before? Is there an action that we can do in partnership with someone else? Is there, some other way to get something accomplished that we hadn't thought of? Can we think outside the box here? So I don't think we can take them literally or be static with them. So when we think of health and well-being for Tarkett, let's think out of the box. It's a product, and we're putting it into schools and healthcare. So what are we doing to maintain the health and well-being of the people using our product? But what else are we doing to the health and well-being of our employees and helping them understand? We just did, someone on my team loves meditation, and they do the app Headspace. So we presented to the CEO, and he looked at us like, you want to do what? And we're like, we want to let anybody who wants it, we want to offer a free app to Headspace. And he goes, fine. But he goes, I'm just telling you, I don't think people are really interested. Well, we have something like a 73% of the employees signed up for this. And he was like, what? He goes, I need to know what this is then. What are these people signing up for? So then he signed up, and he goes, you can do this in like 3 minutes. I'm like, yeah, I know. But it's like, because the big thing that we kept reading about in workplace is the stress and the families and the stress. So what can, we can't change the lives, but we can offer those small actions. I really feel like little teeny things. And, my friends have made fun of me for years for hanging my clothes on the line as long as I possibly can throughout the year. But I'm like, it's my little thing. It's my little one action. So, but I do think it's, and ask your suppliers, ask the people, the companies you work with. We're starting to have more end users who we work with ask us, do you have UN SDG goals that you're targeting? The hospitality industry is starting to use them as guiding. So I think people are starting to understand. It's taken a long time, but I think they're starting to look at these more as Sean said, it can't be just like you plop them in your CSR report or we're going to get nowhere.
Yeah.
So I think that was more answer than you looked for, Sean, but.
I think that's the point of the conversation. You also made that was probably the best plug for Headspace that I've ever heard. Are you getting a little side action from Headspace?
No, but you know what? That's a good point.
You should. That was great. No, actually, I just JLL also just rolled out a partnership with Headspace. Like I just got
Oh,
an email, from like the corporate HR team of like sign up here for a free Headspace account. So
yeah,
now I'll go try it.
yeah. It's only a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, okay. Did you want me to go back?
Nope, all good.
Okay. 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 I'm not gonna spend too long on JLL's corporate SDG alignment work. Roxanne, you've been at Target for 17 years. I've been at JLL for a little over 17 weeks, like 6 months basically. So and the way that the organization is structured, I'm in our sustainability consulting team, which is a different team than the corporate sustainability team. And the corporate sustainability team is the team that is leading on the JLL commitment to SDGs, et cetera. So I have nothing to do with this work other than like finding it and sharing it with you. But the way that JLL has it structured, starting kind of on the left, this is JLL's sustainability commitment is structured around these 3 pillars of climate action for sustainable real estate, healthy spaces for all people, and inclusive places for thriving communities. And then you can see kind of the materiality assessment that looked at, okay, well, what are the components of that sustainability priority for the organization? How do those, what are the different components of that sustainability priority? And then how do those relate to the different SDGs? So this is essentially the kind of the process that was used to determine, what are the SDGs that are most relevant to JLL and our stakeholders and our built environment clients, et cetera. So I'm not going to dwell on this section too long, just kind of let you see it. And also, this is available on JLL's website, so it's not like I'm sharing something that you can't go and look at later. When we get into the reporting side of things, this is again, getting down to the kind of the target level, right? So you can see exactly this says, by 2030, reduce by 1/3 premature mortality from non-communicative diseases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So these are the actual targets that the UN is measuring at the global, at the national and global level. And then you can see how JLL has aligned targets internal to the organization that are going to move the needle on those kind of global metrics, right? And so you can see kind of the assessment that's been done of like, this is why we think this is one that we can impact, and this is how we think we can impact it, and what we're going to track and see how, and measure our progress against. And so you can see that with good health and well-being in terms of healthy, and then it's linked back to our corporate sustainability priorities, right? This is related to the health of the space, as Roxanne said, right? Like it's not just about employee wellness, it's what is the health impact of the spaces that we manage and that we consult and support and develop. Inclusive places, inclusive places. So again, I don't want to spend too long on this. I just wanted to share kind of like, this is what that reporting looks like for JLL, and the kind of the level of detail that, again, it's not just about like slapping the SDG icon on a page that talks about, all of our, the things that we want to brag about in terms of our sustainability progress, right? It's getting down into the details and into the weeds a little bit. So I don't know if Jim looks like he's reading intently. I don't want to shortchange his time. I can also share this with you afterwards. I don't like.
And he's a super slow reader.
Well, I don't want to. I
No,
mean,
I'm good. I'm good.
if there's anything that comes out from you skimming it, and like if there are questions or things you want to talk about, I'm happy to do that. I just don't. It's also
Yeah.
like, I wanted to just kind of share it more as an example, and then we can dive into the thing that's the ILFI thing, because we've only got like what, 20 minutes left or whatever.
No, this is great. Thank you. I am reading them, but that's okay. I can skim them quickly.
Yeah, well, and like I said, I'm happy to share them. The other thing that I wanted to show, I don't know if, I think I only shared my, I think I only shared the slide deck. Let me do a new share and just share this entire screen. So if you go to the UN Global Compact site, you can actually look up companies that are committed to the, that have been signatories to the compact. And you can see, I mean, you can download every one of their, like, here's all of our progress reports that we've submitted to the compact. So you can actually go in and drill down and see kind of how organizations are doing. The other thing that I just kind of as a point of clarity, one of the things that I wanted to point out is that in the, like all things corporate ESG, it's a bit Wild West. And so it's possible that an organization is slapping SDG logos all over their stuff and they haven't committed to the global compact, right? Like there's no like rule set around how that gets communicated or how it gets used. So it's very, frankly, very likely, given the low number of compact signatories in the US, there's probably a lot of organizations that are using those icons on their stuff without being committed to the global compact.
I think that's a really good point, Sean, because there's nothing that says you can't use the icons.
Yeah.
You know, or if you didn't sign it, there's no guidance there. So I think that's important.
Yeah. I mean, you can even see, like, you can download the letter of commitment from the CEO at the, which I don't know if it was the same CEO, but okay. I just wanted to show that.
Download the letter of commitment from some CEO or other. Yeah.
Well, I just don't know. I've been here for 6 months. I don't know if Christian Ulbricht was the CEO in 2009. I didn't do that research.
I know ours was signed by a different CEO, so.
I will say Christian Ulbricht is like, I mean, it's not like I've met him or interacted with him at all, but like all the videos that I've seen of him, he's amazing. So okay, so let me walk through. This is a resource that's available on the ILFI website, and we've got a link to it. And this was a exercise of trying to map indicators that indicator to indicator. So within each one of these goals, there's, like I said, 5 to 11 different indicators that the UN is measuring, and with specific metrics and specific targets, right? Reduced by 1/3 by 2030, some number. So the exercise here was to align what are the metrics that Living Building Challenge is measuring, and are those metrics the same metrics or contributing metrics to the things that the UN is measuring. So you could realistically claim, even though it's a tiny little slice of the pie, that the acreage that was set aside for habitat preservation for the imperative on the place pedal is contributing to life below water and life on land, because they're measuring the proportion of land that is protected in perpetuity for, right? We added 1 acre to that, but it's going into that global bucket. So the way that these are structured is that this is looking at, there is overlap between at least one indicator in these SDGs and the metrics that are being used to document Living Building Challenge compliance. And so part of these out that are kind of floating out here are a little bit more universal around kind of alignment with ILFI as an organization, because there's no guarantee that a Living Building Challenge project is going to help with education levels in the United States unless it's a school, right? And so there's that kind of link. There's climate action. Again, those metrics are measured around like the number of government policies focused on climate change or mitigating climate change. And so while ILFI supports those, it wasn't identified as like a Living Building Challenge project guarantees that there's going to be more climate action from the local government or from the federal government. And so those are the ones that are floating out here. So this is the table that you can go to the website and download this table, which gets into this level of detail that shows you which indicators. And I'm gonna, I can zoom in just as an example. So this is kind of the level of detail that exists on these resources. So this lists the ILFI imperative for each, or Living Building Challenge imperative for each petal, and then which indicators are linked to that action, right? So I used the habitat exchange example already, right? The ratio for SDG 11.3.1 is measuring the ratio of land consumption rate to relative to population growth rate, right? And if a Living Building Challenge project is setting aside land equal to the amount of land that's being developed, then that changes that ratio globally, even though it's a tiny little bit. Total expenditure per capita spent on preservation, protection, and conservation. Again, if you're doing a habitat exchange, there's dollars that are being spent to do that. That goes into that bucket. Coverage of protected areas in relation to marine areas. If you're using a marine habitat as your habitat exchange, then it goes there. If you're using land-based, it goes here. And again, proportion of important sites that are covered by protected areas. So that's the logic that extends kind of throughout the whole document to say, what is the imperative measuring, or what is the imperative requiring of the project, and how does that relate to the things that the SDGs are measuring? And I don't have an example of this in the slide deck, but there's the inverse table as well, which looks at the SDGs and which LBC imperatives relate to that SDG. So you can kind of do it, like if you're working with an organization like Target, who's already said, these are our priority SDGs, then you can say, okay, cool. Here's how we will use the Living Building Challenge to help you fulfill on your commitment to these SDGs, and help show you how, how this project in particular is going to help you make progress towards your SDG commitments, right? So you can go back and forth with these resources. I think that might be the last slide. Let me see. And then we can actually just have some dialogue.
I think the last one is the one that has the link.
Resources.
I
Yeah,
think that was it then.
resources. So there's the actual website for the SDGs, the website for the Global Compact, the website for the ILFI and or the Living Building Challenge SDG crosswalk, and then the global progress reports linked there.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Wow, great. Whew.
Yeah. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
So much to do. I'm swimming. Okay.
Who wants to start?
Yeah. So go ahead, Lisa. Of course. Come on.
You asked. So I'm hopping mad about child labor in the United States right now. And I'm wondering what large corporations like Target can do about enforcing labor laws in states that don't have any.
So if a supplier wants to have a partnership with Target, they have to sign off on agreeing to the labor laws that we state as our guidelines, which is the state of Ohio. And so for the state of Ohio, there's age, and there's even a breakdown from like 16 to 18. If they're working, they can only work so many hours. They have to have so many breaks, and they can't work around certain equipment. So we have that in our contract with all of our suppliers. So we do have some suppliers who won't work with us.
So what are you going to do when the laws in Ohio change?
Yeah.
We'll just probably stick to what we have in our contract, because we don't state that it's an Ohio law. We just picked up that information because that's where the corporation was, but we state it as a Target policy. So we have suppliers, and we use it internationally because we do purchase. We have a purchasing arm in the US and a purchasing arm in France. And our France office is much stricter even than we are. in the US in terms of purchasing, but if the supplier won't sign an agreement, then we won't work with them. And part of that is also through cradle to cradle certification. So for us, the UN and the cradle to cradle certifications go hand in hand very nicely, because there is a fair labor part in cradle to cradle as well. So what helps us there is cradle to cradle does do spot inspection of like repetitive suppliers. So if they saw someone on our supply list and maybe on another manufacturer's supply list, they would probably have someone spot check that. So that's a nice for us, because we can't spot check all of our suppliers. But the cradle, that combination together works really well for us. And we do, and it is, as I said, our Alabama facility makes me cringe all the time, because I just, you drive through the area there, it's very poor. But it is union in Alabama. And so we abide by their union rules, which are pretty stringent. So that also helps there. But we really feel like we have to control that supply chain. And that's our responsibility to only work with suppliers who are aligned with what we want. And we call it forced change, because we're a big company and we have a big purchase power, just as all of you as specifiers have a big purchase power. And so if we're hoping that our purchase power is enough to make changes, and we also partner, so for instance, the Vinyl Institute, there are a lot of refineries, there are a lot of chemical companies, and having a voice with them to say, these are our guidelines. You may be part of this organization as well as we are, but if you can't meet these kind of health and safety guidelines, then we can't partner with you as a supplier. And having those tough conversations. In the last probably 2 years, our procurement department has become very sustainability driven. Before that, they didn't care what it was, it's price. If it's a penny different, we're buying it. Now, because of our initiatives and because of the way we work, the sustainability has come top down all the way down now through that procurement department. And now procurement, I'm on calls weekly with them. Do you want pre-consumer, post-consumer recycled content? What contracts do they have to have? Do they need to have cradle to cradle principle? I mean, they're asking those questions now. And that's really the driver. Like I can say I want to, I want 30% recycled content in all our products, but if procurement's not buying it, then it's not as easy to get. And if procurement isn't making sure those contracts are signed, so it has to be the whole corporation. It has to be, it can't, as Sean was saying earlier, it's nice to have in your CSR report, but if you don't actually have people in the organization taking those actions, it doesn't happen. So a long-winded answer to your question, but it's my favorite topic of sustainability. As my team always, as I do presentations, usually someone on my team is up front going, okay, enough. But it's important.
You won't get that here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lisa, one of the other, I'm sure you know about the Design for Freedom folks.
Yeah. I think a whole bunch of us are going, so.
Good.
Yes, that's a really good point, Sean. They're a great group.
Yeah.
And they got some really good press this week where people who I've been talking to about this for years were like, hey, have you ever heard of this? Oh. Yeah.
The answer, Lisa,
that's
is
the one that I've been telling you
that's so
about for a
great.
while.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you're telling me about it. Tell me more. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing it with me.
It's just, my kids have known for years what I do, what I talk about continuously. And then the other day, my daughter is pregnant. She goes, Mom, you shouldn't buy any baby toys with phthalates in it. And I'm like, thank you, honey. I'm going to remember that when I buy stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. Why don't you go look around and see which ones? Yeah. Do some research. That'd be really great. Yeah.
But it's getting there. You got to get there. Then that's that personal connection. And that's why we do with our employees. If it doesn't mean anything to you personally, then why is it important? So it has to be all through the company.
Ain't it the truth? Just
Oh.
thinking of all those times my kids have like kicked my butt about stuff. It's like, I can't believe you still do that. It's like, the yes, Lisa did get a shout out. I was very excited to see that. I forgot to say something. Oh yeah. So one of the things I'm interested in is where are the areas that are the most troublesome as you look through sort of, there are parts of the goals and parts of the compact commitments that are sort of right up your alley. Others that are like probably important, but oh man, they're a pain in the butt to work on. They're really hard. I mean, obviously procurement is one.
For us,
But-
procurement, finding the raw materials we want is very difficult, like
Mhm.
that still perform, that are cost effective for the consumer and healthy. That's a tough one. I would say the water part has been hard for us because we use a lot of water, and we make resilient floor that's a PVC. So, making sure we have filters, making sure that we're not wasting water, that we're closed looping it. I feel like in the last year, we finally have made good headway for that, but I feel like that really took us a while to figure out, okay, what can we do differently here? So I would say those two are the hardest for us. And then I would say, even poverty is not one of our main goals, but it is, I think, for most of the people in the company, kind of like, well, what can we do? And so we're trying with our HR department to figure out what do we do, how do we address it so the people in the organization feel better about it? And that's really, that's more about interacting with our employees to help them see what they can do. And the employees want to feel good about something. And this could be that this is one of the things they've expressed interest in. So we still haven't figured out how we do that, on a national level.
Mm. Sean, you want to?
I think, well, I don't have
Yeah.
a specific example, but I was going to say, I think for me, the thing that I've always, it's almost more of like a philosophical dilemma in that every organization, every activity touches on, like, the SDGs are pretty comprehensive and universal, and it's all interconnected. And so you could make the case that like every organization, every function within society touches all 17. And yet, like, the reality is you can't focus on all 17 if you're going to actually try to set goals and actually do things and measure progress and do actions. You do need to prioritize them. And so I think and that was my kind of pushback to Roxanne, was like, well, you develop these alignments with the SDGs. Is that static, or do you go back and, okay, well, we've made really good progress over there and we've got an initiative in place, and that's like running smoothly. Let's go back to them and figure out what else we can be taking on. I think that's the kind of the ideal balance of it,
Mhm.
because otherwise you're just leaving responsibility out of your scope, right? It's like,
Right.
you to your point, right? It's like that one's difficult, or it's not really aligned with our core mission, or it's not really aligned with our core function. And so it's not a thing that we can, like, without going outside of our comfort zone, we can't really do anything on it. So we'll just not talk about it. And I think that makes sense for the first round, right? Like the first attempt at like really trying to use them and figure out what can we do, what's my impact on it. But you got to go back, I think, and revisit once you've got programs in place.
The way I
And there's
describe it
definitely some
internally.
that, and there's definitely some that we still don't feel like we're there. I mean,
Right.
there's still work to be done,
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
The way I describe that internally for us is that, you start somewhere and you've got a goal. You do a bunch of stuff, and then that goal becomes where you start. Now you got a new goal. And
Right.
sometimes it's actually the place where you start gets screwed up, like with COVID, right? So, okay, now that becomes the goal. And now you start this
Right.
other horrible
Right.
place. And it's like,
Right.
but you got to recognize that and sort of see that transition.
And I think too, like, we were doing really good with employee engagement. And then COVID hit and, we were like at a very high rate. Now we're at a very low rate. And so that's now a struggle is, what can we be doing to get employees more engaged in not just the sustainability development goals, but just in general?
Right.
Because that does impact everything we do. And I think that's a struggle a lot of companies are having. But how do you make people feel valued again? And how do you make them feel like their impact is important? And I think that is part of the UN Sustainability Development Goals in that if you don't see value in what you're doing every day at work, it's a mental health. It's again that, goes back to one of the goals of well-being.
Exactly. Yes, and the another beautiful thing about the SDGs and that whole process is it gives you superordinate goals, right? In other words, it's a way to, which is what I said at the beginning, it's a way to connect to the world. And it's like, oh, these matter to the world. I can have an effect on the world.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's pretty powerful.
It is. And, sometimes as an organization, you have to make some really tough choices. And we're an international company and we manufacture in Ukraine and Russia. So when the war started, our facilities were bombed. We had people living in our warehouse. We were able to get them out, but we then had to make a decision about the 3 factories we had in Russia. And the CEO said, I'm probably going to make a very unpopular decision, but we're keeping them running because our employees need a paycheck. And if we let them go, Russia owns them forever. We never get them back. And he's had some very angry employees, but he said, I have to stick to what I believe in. My number one responsibility is our employees. If they don't have these jobs, where else are they going to get money? Where else are they going to be employed? And so it was very controversial for a while. We had a lot of bad social media, but he stuck to his ground and he felt like this is our corporate goal and I have to stay with it. So it's not always very positive and all, it's not always good.
It's not all roses and bluebirds. Yeah.
No, and somebody's making those tough decisions and it's a very personal thing, which way you would go. And so, that's how he went. And, a few employees were not happy about it.
I could see, yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else have thoughts, questions? So, yeah, go ahead.
I had something pretty quickly. It just popped into my mind when we related the SDGs to the ILFI goals. In the sustainability consulting space, we have a couple reoccurring clients. We work with them really on when they're defining project goals, and they're oftentimes, especially in lab projects, looking for market differentiators because it's kind of the standard now that every lab at least goes for LEED. So they're looking for things to differentiate themselves. Would you say that, or I guess the question is, how would you go about kind of maybe presenting them with the option of looking at how Living Building Challenge, even if it's core certification, can help them not only create a market differentiator, but also help their corporate sustainability goals?
You are describing the use case for why I created that chart. Go to their website, download their corporate sustainability report from last year, figure out what their goals are. They're probably got at least the logos slapped around somewhere, if not detail about like what they're actually doing. And then use that thing to be like, look, you said you're committed to this. This program is aligned with that and can help you document, that you're walking the walk.
Mm,
And I think what Sean, the chart is amazing. I think it's such a good tool to use. But it's also, as a corporation, as Target, if we were building a building, we would then take that information and say, we just worked with this organization to create a new facility. And because of that facility and what we did, we're now meeting these goals to our employees. And we're starting now to think, how do we give some kind of something to our end users that buy our products to say, hey, you can put this on your website so your employees know you met this goal. And I mean, maybe it is the living building challenge, just that diagram saying, look what, as an organization, the people we worked with help us create for this facility. Because I think it's really impactful when you look at just that first page you pulled up, Sean. Like it's impactful to see how all of that aligns.
I kind of agree. And Robert, I had the same thought, and it's like, I hadn't really thought this through. It's like, yeah, this is
mhm.
this is pretty great. So
Yeah.
see,
Yeah, you relate it back to what they say they care about, and then you're like, I just downloaded this from your website. I don't know.
Right.
I mean,
I don't know. Is that
you
what's really
guys,
going
it's
on?
your
Yeah.
words. I don't know. I just,
You said this is
you
what
said you wanted to
do.
do this. I'm
Yeah.
trying to help you do it.
Wanted to check.
It kind of calls them out on it and they have to say yes then.
Exactly.
So Roxanne,
Yeah.
I do love how you have taken, like how Target has taken the global compact to like the core of the company. And then we've kind of heard a little bit about how there's a little bit of a lack of quality assurance necessarily within the space. So, whether people are post-rationalizing but I'm curious, like, what can we count on when we're talking to or understanding companies who are using the UN framework? How, like, what accountability is on either the global level or a company level from an external perspective?
I think from an external perspective, it's got to be about transparency. So we do a CSR report. It's on our website. But if you look at, so as a flooring manufacturer, are we transparent about our products? We have EPDs, we have LCAs. Does the company have an HPD? Like, are they willing to share with you what they're doing with that product? Do they have those kind of documents that you can say, okay, they are being transparent? Because normally it's not always the case, but a lot of times if for Target, if we're doing an EPD, that means we have to show you, what we're doing with the product, with what we're doing with energy. And if we're not making progress, it shows up there. And I think it's hard for as a design firm to be able to know whether you're just slapping the stickers on or not in terms of the UN SDGs. But I would say, the CSR report, but are they doing, Eco Bodies is a great example. That's another certification that to be able to qualify for that, you have to show your improvement with the UN SDGs. The CDP report is carbon disclosure, and that does tick off one of the boxes you have to tick off is the UN. I'm trying to think of what else there is, but it's not easy. It's not to be able to.
I don't mean to interrupt
right.
you, Roxanne.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's
I
okay. Go
also
right
have
ahead.
another
It's okay.
call that's starting. I didn't block out on my calendar for immediately after this to give myself some
Yeah.
flexibility. So
But
I'm sorry
Diane,
about
I
that.
might
right.
get back to you on that because I think that's a good thought I need to think about is how do we show that? So,
Yeah.
but thank you guys. This has been fabulous.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you all.
Thank
That's
you,
me.
Roxanne.
If anybody wants my email address, it's there. Please reach out to me.
Fabulous.
It's great to be in communication with all of you again.
Thank you,
It
everybody.
See you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
See you, everybody.